we're going to get to the subject of the evening here. This is a map of the situation with the railroads and canals in 1838, about that in this area. And you can see the C&O Canal here along the Potomac from Georgetown to Cumberland. You have the Pennsylvania Tidewater Canal up here along the Susquehanna. And there were the Schuylkill canals and so on, the so-called Tidewater canals. The whole idea, of course, after the War of 1812, and we could go to the interior to bring out raw materials, and we needed them down at the coast, was to somehow navigate these waterways inland. At first, they did the rivers to the Appalachian Mountains up here, and then later on, closed canals. The railroads, various railroads are here, and here's the Baltimore High from Baltimore to Harper's Ferry, and then it was to go to Hagerstown and on to Cumberland that way. It didn't. It went over into West Virginia. But we're not going to get into all that detail. The main thing that was their goal, a lot of these railroads, was to get to the C&O Canal, Williamsport, and get the coal off of it. Now, the canals were built to move everything, but it ended up that mostly they moved coal. And the coal was very good for steamships. Now, this is a picture. By the way, this is the Western Maryland Railroad that finally was built in 1852 from Baltimore West to Williamsport. Now, the Western Maryland's goal was to get to the C&O Canal to get coal. Now, this is a dock at Port Covington in Baltimore. And you'll notice something. Here's a steamship. This is what they call a collier. Colliers were ships that hauled coal to coaling stations around the world. When all the ships, including the naval ships, burned coal, most of the tropical areas didn't have coal. So you have to have coaling stations all around, and of course they burned a lot of coal. The coal in Western Maryland was considered, and at the head of the C&O Canal, was excellent for steamships. So this dock is a Western Maryland dock. You'll see coal cars up here being unloaded. There's chutes that came down. This is a barge. Now, barge would be loaded with coal, and they would go around the coast to other locations, and it would be transferred to ships. A steamship usually was used to haul coal around the world, not just around the coast. Now you look on the other side, you see there's 6 masts. That's one of the Baltimore schooners. If anybody knows what a Baltimore schooner was, it was a sailing ship. You used the schooners around the coast because you didn't want to burn what you were hauling. So you used sailing ships to deliver the coal around the coast. This picture was taken in 1906. So you were still, almost all ships, there were steamships were burning coal yet, including the naval vessels. Okay. And of course our Navy was the Great White Fleet, going around the world and all that. They had to have plenty of fuel wherever they were, wherever they had to have maneuvers. And very important. So most of the coal moving down the C&O Canal went to shipping. Either transferred to Williamsport on Western Maryland, going to Baltimore, or going to Georgetown and transferred directly to the ships in the Potomac River. In fact, there's a story that I found in the newspaper where that indicates what they were doing. When the canal boat got to the Watergate, the Watergate, you've heard, of course, the Watergate with the scandal and everything, but that was where the canal opened into the river. Well, what they would do is the canal boats would be taken out through that gate. Tugboats would get a hold of them, lash them together, take them down to the ships or power plants, and they would tie up and unload their coal there. And in one incident, they towed a boat into a power plant on the dock, and there was a steam pipe sticking out of the side of the dock, and unfortunately, the family was in the cabin, of course, riding on the boat along with the mules. When they went to dock at this wharf, the steam pipe broke and cut right through the cabin and scalded the whole family to death in the cabin of the canal boat. And of course, that was in the paper, and that was quite a tragedy. But from that, you know what they were doing is actually towing these canal boats themselves down to unload the coal at the power plants. They didn't transfer the railroad down there. Okay, so we know that most of the canal coal, of course, they moved other things too, but they ended up pretty much exclusively with coal, and they were going for shipping. Now but we're going to talk about where it was pulled off at Williamsport to go to the customers. It wasn't shipping. Okay, let's change the record here. Okay, we talked about the Western Maryland here coming to Williamsport. Well, here it is coming into town along the Conococheague Creek and down along the canal itself. This was where it terminated in 1873. And their whole point was to get the coal off the canal. Now here's a little more detailed map, and we're going to see things, some detail of this area. Here we have a photograph taken from up in here. Here's the Conococheague Creek. There's the back of the aqueduct. Right here across the creek. That's where the canal crossed the creek. Here is a scale house. Now, it's located right there, the base of it. Obviously, you have to weigh the coal before you could ship it. So you knew how much to charge, and they would bring the cars around and weigh them at the scale house here. This is another view of the scale house, same view. Now there's a little box car on the scale, and you see the aqueduct again. A little bit closer view of the scale house. Okay. Now we're going to go around the corner, and we're going to look at the map there, and we're going to see what is around this corner through Laurel Hill. Around here. Okay. Now right there was the warehouse of Embry and Cushwa. The Cushwa family ran a tannery in Clear Spring. They eventually came down to Williamsport to buy the Conococheague Pottery Company. The Conococheague Pottery Company, I think, is the oldest industrial site possibly in the world that's still working. Well, you think, how can you say that? Because where the brickyard is in Williamsport, they actually found in 1953 prehistoric pottery made by prehistoric peoples on that site. When they rebuilt the brickyard, they dug into this. So they think that pottery was made at that spot with that shale, even in prehistoric times. So it may be one of the oldest industrial sites anywhere that still worked. You can tell your grandchildren that they'll appreciate it. Anyway, here's a bill of sale from Embry and Cushwa, 1870s, because when the railroad came in 1873, then it came over and started this coal dealership right here on the Basin. Now, the canal had gotten there in 1834. So you had all these years, almost 40 years, that the canal did not interchange with the railroad. They took everything down to Georgetown. Well, actually, since 1850. They didn't make it to Cumberland until 1850. So let's look at something else. Let's look at a train. Hey, there is probably an 1870s era train. I think that was taken shortly after the railroad was built. There's the warehouse of Embry and Cushwa. Okay. As you see it, the train is sitting about here in the photograph. This is a picture I took in 1974. In other words, 50 years ago. And there probably was 100 years between those two. Okay? They were still railroading there. Here's the warehouse of Embry and Cushwa. Okay? Still there, still standing. That's the way it sort of looks today with no railroad. And there's the building about 1880. Okay. Mr. Cushwa, and around that same time, bought out Mr. Embry. And you'll notice that it's brick from this point to there, and then wood out to the basin. Okay, everybody thought that this thing was built when the canal came in 1834. But they found, doing some research there, that it was built in 1791, probably by the brother of Otha Holland Williams. Eli Williams, who used it as a warehouse for the Potomac Company boats that went down the river. So when the canal came and put the basin in, it didn't come up to the building. So they built the building out to meet the basin. Okay. But in the 1889 flood, the basin did come up. Okay. So, problem solved, right? Here it is, I sorted today. Now remember, this thing has been through a lot. 1791's been through a lot of big floods. You know, it hasn't burned down yet. And it's still standing. They changed the windows around a little bit on it, but it's another building. It may be one of the oldest industrial structures around. Who knows? You know, you always make those claims, right? There's a shot for train switching. And that's about 1906 or something. And notice they painted the name on the roof because, no, it's about 1910, because after the 1909, when they put the highway bridge in, people could then see the roof better. Now here's 1927. 1927, the canal was done, so they filled in the basin and built railroad track out on it. Okay. But now let's go back and look at the original basin, and we'll look at this building right here. What's that thing? Well, this area has been a microcosm for transportation in the area. That's the powerhouse for the Hagerstown Railway Company. It was built in 1895. The idea was you get the coal off the canal, the water from the creek, and of course the trolley line started from Williamsport to Hagerstown. Now, even though you got these big doors and all, the track never went into that building. Here's the way it looks sort of now. It only lasted as a powerhouse for 3 years. It was replaced by another one in Hagerstown in 1898. So it was sold to Cushwa as a warehouse. It's been there ever since, sort of like that. We're back to this again. What's it look like today? That's what it looks like today. They restored the basin, of course, and rewatered it. Okay, so let's look a little bit more. Now here's the basin area in after the 1889 flood. And what we're going to talk about here is, notice the box cars here. Well, I had a delivery receipt of a load of phosphate. Here it is in a Cumberland Valley boxcar, CB231. It's identical to these Pennsylvania Railroad boxcars here. Same class. Now, everybody says a boxcar is a boxcar. No, it's not. It's like saying an automobile is an automobile. No, they're different. So I'm an amateur freight car story, and I just go nuts over these differences, you know. But anyway, this is a Pennsy boxcar. These are both Pensies. They probably had something like that in them. There's the phosphate building where they unloaded it. Now I want you to also notice the writing on that delivery receipt. That's an everyday form that was done by the agent. Look at the beautiful calligraphy. That they just did that. That's the way they taught people. That's the way you wrote. Okay? A common, ordinary thing. 1883, that is. See there? This whole collection, by the way, of hundreds of these are in this building somewhere. Wonderful collection. Cushwa kept them all. Back to this. Now, we're going to go back to when the railroad first came. Here they are unloading coal. Now, you notice the crude methods. You got guys down here with shovels in the hold of the canal boat. And you got this is a stiff leg derrick. A stiff leg derrick was used for everything then. Because all you had to do was cut down a tree, skin all the bark and the limbs off of it, hook this boom to it, put a block and tackle on, put it on a big pin that could swing around, and you could lift big rocks. In fact, they said they built these barns around here that way. You set one of them up, you could lift the big stones into position. When you're done, you took the derrick away, you burned it in the fireplace or whatever, you know, because it was disposable. Pine trees. These guys had a big iron bucket there. They load it with coal, crank it up, and then dump it in a wheelbarrow and distribute it on the bottom. Now that's hand work. That's work, okay? And they even had somewhere down here, in another view, you'll see a little track they would put up when they got, the pile got longer, that little car, they push it out until it. Anyway, that was how they first unloaded. That bucket, when it was full, weighed about 800 pounds. It was just a big iron bucket, that's all, with a bale on it. Okay, let's look at another view. Now here's another view of that. We see here like a wall retaining the coal pile. But what they would do is, as they unloaded the boat, it was not graded coal, so you took the big chunks out and built a wall out of them, and then you could retain the rest of the coal behind the wall. You had a little fence at the bottom and so on. And this kept it from falling down on the railroad track back into the canal basin. Now you see the old captain standing there and the mule and all that. There was an interesting story here. There was a law in Maryland that you could not cuss out your draft animals on a public road where people could hear it, okay? So somebody was cussing out his mule. Somebody else heard it. They turned him into a local magistrate. And And they said, we want this guy fined, he's cussing this mule out in the sight of their earshot of all these kids and these people. So the magistrate fined the man, the captain. Captain appealed it to Hagerstown, okay? And went to Hagerstown, and the old judge in Hagerstown let him go. His decision was he had a perfect right to cuss out his animals on a public road. Well, the point was it wasn't a public road, it was private property. Since it was railroad and canal, he said, well, I want a public road, you can cuss out all the animals you want. Okay. Took place right here. Here we are, now we're going upgrade. Notice we got the same stiff leg derrick, but now we're raising it with a steam engine. Before, you hook a mule to that or a couple men to raise the bucket, but now you got this steam engine, right? So you're loading cars here, and this is a steam boat. They experimented with canal boats putting steam engines on the one end. Of course, you burned half the load, all on the other half, right? So it wasn't very successful. This is the either then, there were two of them in 1890, the Antares and the Ruby. They had names, everybody named their canal boats. And also put graffiti on them, which wasn't too nice. When the story, the Baltimore High Railroad bought the canal in 1890 after the 89 flood wiped it out because they wanted to protect themselves against other railroads building to compete with them. And they forbid the captains to name their boat or to put any of this dirty talk on them. After that, they owned the equipment and you were an employee. You couldn't just be freewheeling with your boat. And boy, that took a lot of romance out of the canal. Here's another view about 1906. Now we got a great big stiff leg derrick, and we got a clamshell bucket, big steel clamshell bucket we're dropping down in the canal boat. A friend of mine said, you mean tell me here they were dropping a steel clamshell down the bottom of a wood canal boat. They could have torn the thing to pieces or just knocked the bottom out and said, well, you had to be delicate. Okay. And again, the guy would have to shovel the corners because, you know, this is a square box and you can't do much in the corners. This interesting here because this delivery receipt is for a load of coal that was shipped in a car just like this. It would have been a load of anthracite coal from northeastern Pennsylvania from the Philadelphia and Reading Company. Hard coal, they would have then emptied it and reloaded it with the soft coal from western Maryland. Here's a view of that I took in 1974 at about the same spot. This cliff is that cliff right there. There's a lot of other goodies in here we're going to talk about that changed. I always want somebody, Mike or something, to explain this switch. That thing, I have not been able to explain that thing. So the railroaders rally, explain that switch. There's no doubt some patented thing somebody come up with. Okay. Now we're going to look at the aqueduct. Let's go to this difference here. Here's another view of them unloading coal there in the basin. Here we see the aqueduct with a boat in it. Well, here's the upper part of it, the stone wall. Well, in 1920, just before the end of operations, a boat hit the side of the aqueduct, fell in the creek. Okay, so here's the canal boat sitting in the creek. All everybody looking, you know, and knocked the whole stone side out of the aqueduct. Now, later on, you know, they restored it and re-watered it, and they were debating whether to put the stone wall back, because most of the stones are still in the creek, or to put the wooden temporary wall back that they used at that time for a couple more years until they quit. So you see what they did, and that's the way it looks today, with the water in it, of course. Okay. Let's go back and look at that. We're also going to look, while we're at it, at capacities. This car right here holds as much or more than a canal boat. Okay? So here we got this little piddly thing, 30 tons, and this monster that can hold just what a canal boat holds. So that shows you what kind of capacity the railroad ended up having over canals. But then a small vehicle like this was about as big as you could get on the railroad. Also, something else. This is a scene on the Pennsylvania Canal at Columbia, Pennsylvania. Notice the difference in the coal piles and the amount of material they're handling. The Pennsylvania canals were big time. And this was like anthracite coal being moved down to Philadelphia, places like that. This is as big as it got at Williamsport. So as you know, the connection to Baltimore never ended up amounting to much. You can see this was big time. And this is taken about 1900. Right, and the Pennsylvania Railroad bought the Pennsylvania Canal system basically, and they just laid railroad yards over all this. So you can't go and see this today, but you can see that, or what's left of it. That's the beauty of it, but it never really amounted to much volume-wise. Okay. Now here's a view in 1909, they built a highway bridge across the river at that point. And in those days, all highway bridges were built by they were built with the private turnpike companies. The state did not build highway bridges. And then turnpike companies would charge toll to support the maintenance on the bridge. You can even see, if you can look here, it tells you what the toll is. And there's a little gate where people walk across. Very few vehicles. This is the dedication. That's the dedication in 1909 of the Washington Berkeley Bridge Company highway bridge, okay? They actually had a toll bridge there up until the early 50s. We used to pay toll, my family and I, when we visited relatives in West Virginia. It was always a dime for a carload of people. At the end, it was a quarter, and of course, my parents thought it was robbery. You didn't go very often if you had to pay a quarter. Oh my heavens. So, anyway, then shortly after that, the state took it over and got rid of the toll. But there were 9 different turnpike companies in Marshall County, by the way, and all of them were privately owned. The county only owned the dirt roads, the back roads, which were all dirt. None of them were ever paved. Supposedly, the turnpikes were paved, but like every other individual company, some were good and some were not. So you got into this controversy all the time of, you wrecked my buggy got wrecked on your turnpike, I'm going to sue you, because you don't maintain it. And there were articles in the paper where that happened. One guy lost a whole load of eggs that way. Okay. Somebody said he was sorry to go along with, he deserved it. There you go. This is from down here looking up. There's the highway bridge. It's about 1920. So we're getting close to the end of the canal. Elaine, I wanted to tell you, this is your grandfather's picture. This one,
That one?
yeah. He took that in 1920.
That was before Mom was born.
What's that?
That was before Mom was born.
Okay, there you go. Because he went down there and took some pictures. Here's the way it looks today. And we got the same place. And then if we're up on the bridge looking down at the same time, we see this. And then this is the way that looks today. And this is my relatives here. They ran, you notice where this boat's sitting here, that's where this pleasure boat is. They call it pleasure boat. You can see the highway bridge back there. My great aunt and uncle, that's my great aunt right there. Great uncle's not there, but they ran this boat for charters up and down the canal. And you could rent it. And this particular charter here was people from Gettysburg. They came down on the train from Gettysburg into Hagerstown, rode the trolley over to Williamsport, and then they had an excursion. They went up to Fort Frederick and explored around the old ruined fort at Fort Frederick, and then they went down to Harper's Ferry and got across and explored Harper's Ferry. And they took pictures all along the way, and I've got a whole album of pictures that they took, snapshots on their trip. 1916, that's when they did this. It's a treasure house of information. But they did that frequently, and they paid him, and he paid the canal to allow that. My mother always said, she used to ride this as a little kid. It was her uncle who would take them on. And she said, well, in the wintertime, you know, they drained the canal, and the boats would all sit down on the bottom. And when you put the water back in the canal in the spring, of course, nothing came up, everything was underwater because the boats had dried out. So you had to wait till they swelled up and then pump the bilge out so they would raise. And you know, freight boats too, because old wooden boats, you know, dry out. Of course, I learned a very bad lesson. We had a wooden fishing boat, old scow, and we had some boards went out of the bottom of it, night. So I'm gonna fix it, but made the boards too tight. So when we got it in the water, then it swelled up, the boards buckled and all popped out. And we sunk again. Don't do that, you make it loose, you know. Anyway, this is a map. Notice the Washington Berkeley Bridge Company. And now in 1922, we got a black line going here. What's going on? Well, we're going to build a power plant here. Well, wait a minute, I forgot this. This is what they call a launch. And they built that, they built that to pull people around, and that was supposedly built after the plans of real launches they used up down the canal. And they used it, this is the day they launched it. Okay. Okay. Yeah, all right. All right, here's the first bridge that they built to go to the power plant, temporary trestle. You notice nobody can go beyond that bridge, and the boats are all sort of boarded up. This is 1922, and they got to bring construction materials with this kind of stuff, into the power plant site. So there's a little train back in ballast across that little trestle. And then later on, the wonderful C&O Canal company required the power company to build a lift bridge so that they could still navigate underneath this track. So this bridge was specifically built, designed for that site so that they could still use the canal. Now, everybody always argues, well, they never went east of there anyway. Here's an interesting view. Notice the date, April 22nd, 1923. You see that boat is sitting on the bottom. The canal has been drained. people are running around looking at the bridge, I think it had just been finished. But they hadn't put water in the canal yet, in 23. Now supposedly they did later on, but very little went east. Everybody said they never used that bridge, never looked at that bridge for a canal boat to go east, but all the records say it all go east in the latter part of 23. But that was it. That was the end of the line. Okay. There's, with a train on it, later years, 1974. And in 1959, they brought a large stator in, put it in the power plant. Notice the size of this flat car. That had to go over that bridge to get into the power plant. That was a tight fit, I'll tell you, to go through that structure. But this was a temporary track. Here's the river, and this is the side of the power plant. Now what they did was they built structure here to move that into the plant that way, off that flat car. Okay. There's a view of it today. I love it. I like the duckweed. I love duckweed. There's the launch. That's before they could raise it. And then later on, we're gonna make it work. Well, yeah. Well, they raised it up to take the launch under. Now, I want to tell you that Karen Gray is giving a lecture there. That's Karen Gray and a group from Shepherd Springs. I just happened to be there when she was there and took a picture. I didn't know anything about it except I walked up there and these people walking around looking, and that was her lecture. She said later, this is the way it looks today with the wonderful stairway and all that. Okay. Yeah, we made it work. Okay. Okay. All right, here's a map of the area. Here's the power plant. Up here would be your the bridge, the lift bridge, and so on. An overall view in the 50s, and you want to note here, there's the aqueduct, Cushwa building, where you see how the canal is really grown up in trees in the 50s, okay? The bridge, of course, the toll bridge, Williamsport Cemetery, Riverview Cemetery, my future home, I might add. True, it is. Okay, here's the original bridge that they had to build here across the canal when it was built in 1834. The canal said the Turnpike Company, there you go, which was going down to ford the river, had to make sure that they provided the bridge over the top of the canal. They couldn't be wading through it or whatever. So this is the bridge. This is the wooden one that they built. This is a view, just a map again, showing where it went across down to the river. Now here's the bridge in 1879 that replaced it. The Bowman that you get down here and look at today replaced that wooden thing. Okay. Wasn't until 1879. They also went over the railroad right here. See, the turnpike crossed the railroad there. Here's an overall view of it, the postcard. A little bit of color. And there's a view looking east. And where do we see some buildings down there? There's the 1889 flood view with some box cars sitting there. Okay. Tops of them. Okay. And now there's the track, the two tracks that went down to the end. And we see the Darby, there's a nice view of that canal boat. He's heading for DC. And there's the Steffi and Finley building that's also sold coal down there, and the Darby Mill. There's the Darby Mill. It was a grain mill. They also had a big traveling crane on the track here to unload the canal boat. That was the newest incarnation of unloading equipment. Okay, now, if we look here, there's the Steffi and Finley, one of their bills of sale for 1882. And what was that in? All right. There's a picture in 1905. Most of this coal here had drifted down from the Cushwa wharf, okay, toward the Steffi and Finley wharf. But that was coal that was drifted by gravity after it was unloaded at the Cushwa wharf. 1920, it looked like that. I don't know that your grandfather took that, but he might have. And here's, I was going to say it looks like that today, but I should have taken a modern day view. They've cleared this. You can walk down the railroad now. I think anybody's been over there knows that. But when I took this, it was all still brewing up. Okay. Oh, I'm sorry, out of sequence here. Okay, we're going down at the end and looking back. Now this is interesting because this is a grain boat. These are coal boats. This is a work scow. So they had different kinds of boats. But you see the way the hatches are on that, that's for hauling grain, not coal. Okay. And this is all that's left today, of course, is that wall, that stone wall. I think around 1906, the Darby Mill burned and it was never replaced. But the Steffi and Finley building and company operated up to the 20s, even after the canal had quit. Okay, let's walk here a little bit. Now, this is a very, very rare picture, and Cooper Wolf really always preached this. He had this thing in his, it says USRA and a number. All right. The USRA stood for the United States Railroad Administration. In World War I, they took over the railroads, actually in Scout, they took over private property to operate the railroads because everything was just screwed up, they couldn't move the coal and food stuff. So the government did it, and they had a bunch of canal boats built down in the Carolinas, towed them up to Georgetown and put them on the canal because they needed more boats to haul coal from Cumberland down. So the United States Railroad Administration had these boats built to the very same plan as all the other canal boats. I forget how many they had. And they painted them, guess what? Battleship gray.
Okay.
So here's one of them. And Hooper always said that that's the only time there's been a picture of one. I don't know. I guess he's right. Now, if we look up there in the distance, there's this old crane that was on the railroad. See on the railroad track with a big clamshell, little kid next to it. That's what they used to unload the coal later on. They could run this thing up down the track. Of course, I always thought that thing looks real top heavy, you know. Well, of course, it fell in.
Oh, yeah.
So this is World War I again. Notice the date, 1918. They were trying to unload a load of pig iron. Now they had, in Cumberland, they had a bunch of foundries and some steel plants. So they were shipping pig iron in canal boats down the canal. And apparently we're transferring it to a railroad car, but the guys that operated the crane were used to unloading coal, not figuring it. So it was a little bit heavy. And the thing tipped over and went into the canal. That was kind of a neat thing. But another thing that happened, there was a big headline on one of the newspapers. Huns, H-U-N-S, the Germans, had put a bomb in a canal boat and a load of coal. When it got on down to this next unloading point, the crane went down to grab the coal and it pulled this bomb out. Well, you know, you remember in the old cartoons, it looked like an ash can with a big fuse. They were always lighting. Well, that's what it looked like. That was a bomb. Oh, it was a big deal, you know, the Huns were trying to destroy the canal, right? Sabotage, right? Okay, let's go down to the other unloading point. We just left here, and we're going 2 miles down to the Cumberland Valley Railroad unloading point at Powell's Bend. And let's look here, a little bit more detail, a little closer. Notice there's some track here. The Cumberland Valley wanted to get there first to the Franklin Railroad. When they got there in 1873, the Williamsport got mad because the Cumberland Valley didn't come through their town. So they went to the legislature and they said, don't let them interchange with the canal. They're a Pennsylvania company. They can't do it. We want a Maryland company to do that. So Western Maryland did. So they had to build a bridge across the river and go over and interchange with the B&O directly. So they were all sad about that, of course. Here's a little track layout there at the Powell's Bend, showing the bridge and the track coming down. Here's what it looked like in 1893. There's the bridge across the river, the railroad bridge. That's the Cumberland Valley Bridge. And this train is set up. It's winter time. So this is a setup shot where they've unloaded from this coal pile into these cars and they're taking pictures. This would not have been the way it was set up. Here's the ramp track, see where they are going up to the end of the bridge here. And these are Cumberland Valley cars here. So that's the interchange to Powell's Bend. In 1910, they got a unloading crane too and changed the layout there. So they had a few more tracks. This car, by the way, was in that consist at the end, and it proves a point that will be lost here. But when I was showing this somewhere else, I was trying to prove a point. Should have kept it out. Anyway, this is the change in the track layout right here in order to accommodate this crane so it can unload canal boats into railroad cars here. Okay. Picture taken in 1910 by the Consolidation Coal Company, who owned the canal essentially at that time. Well, it's being owned the property, but they owned all the other stuff. And it's like two principals in the Consolidation Coal Company, and I know people don't, a Mr. Delano and a Mr. Roosevelt. Does that ring a bell? Franklin Delano Roosevelt, right? And they were indeed his grandfather, his grandfather, were in Consolidation Coal, okay? That's where the money came from. You never hear about where it came from, but that's where it came from, okay? All right. This is up at the elevator at Williamsport. Let's go up there. And we're starting down here at the interchange. And up here is Williamsport Station, Gower Station, they call it. And this is happens to be the same cars that they unloaded down at the canal. They would shuttle them up there, and this waybill sort of proves it, because this was 1903. It came from Powell's Bend. If you see the amount, you know that that didn't travel very far. And that was a bill for the amount of coal that would have been transferred from one canal boat up to there. He would have bought it by the boatload, I guess. The dealer, Mr. Gower, here, and they came up and unloaded. Then they would shuttle those cars back down to load again, and maybe take them to Hagerstown. They had a dock in Hagerstown too. So let's go back down again. That's your 1910 view. And let's look at some of the structures still standing. That's the abutment for this bridge. That thing is still there. It's beautiful. There's not one stone out of place. It was abandoned in 1916. It's never been touched since that. That's a view of a culvert that went under the track there. You see on where the crane is. And here is a pier, this pier right here, which is also still standing along the towpath. Okay? All right. There's the track layout once again. Next thing we're going to look at is where the scale is. Here's the scale where you weighed the coal that was unloaded, like we saw the scale of Williamsport. There's the scale pit, still there. Still there in the woods. The canal's over here. We're standing up here looking down. Here's the way that would have looked when it was built. Okay. This is another track scale up in New Jersey being constructed. It's exactly the same kind of scale. Okay, you see the balance beams and all that stuff. You see these bases, they would have been all the same. The scale house would have been there and there. Okay. Here's the Winchester and Western crossing at Williamsport. There's the map showing it, the way it looks today right here. And here's a view that, drone view my boss built of the area. Notice this pier is this pier right here. That's the Winchester and Western train coming to Hagerstown. Okay. Yes, I know, that's an end of it. But I'm gonna do one more thing. We're gonna close this by looking at this picture here. The canal mule. If it wouldn't have been for him, there wouldn't have been a C&O Canal. And a gentleman, Howard Conrad, and his brother visited there in 1920. Apparently they didn't know anything about it. They were doing a motor trip. They come upon Williamsport. They saw the canal. They went down, started talking to the old captains, and they were fascinated with the mules. That's one of the canal mules right there. And so his brother was so inspired, he went back, wrote some poetry concerning the mule. Our nation owes the Chesapeake and Ohio Canal mule a great debt. But when he had pulled the last barge down the C&O, ending nearly 100 years of commerce on the old waterway, he did not pause to wait for our claim. Instead, wagging his long ears, switching his tasseled tail, and uttering a derisive bray, he walked off the towpath into history. Thank you. And that's the real thing right there. You don't usually see a portrait of him. He looked like a horse. He was big, definitely big. He weren't like donkeys. Any comments or questions? Everybody was very quiet. Attentive, we're asleep. I don't know. But anyway, any comments on what I said or comment, just questions on the whole thing?
I have a question.
Yeah.
I should have stopped and asked you, not have one picture. There by the lift bridge, there's
Yeah.
a structure that goes up and over the railroad.
Yeah,
What was that for? You know what I mean?
the structure, the whatever.
It's like a post and then it goes out over top.
Oh, it was what they called a telltale. A telltale had the, it was like a crane, but it was over the track because it was a low clearance there. And in the days when the brakeman would ride on top of the cars, the telltale, there were rods that went down so far, and then the rest of the way were ropes. And at night, or whenever you weren't looking, you would hit those if you were standing on top of the car, and that meant that there was a low clearance, you better get down, or you were gonna hit it. And that's what it was there for, and the last part of that would be ropes. These were, the ropes were long rod away, and they would just hit you, and you, oh, something here's low, you know. They had them all over, but that was the low clearance was the highway bridge. Okay, it was,
Before you got to the lift bridge.
yeah, before you got to lift bridge. Yeah. Yeah,
When did the canal buy the railroad? Was that the end of the canal?
when the railroad bought them in about 1890, to protect the right of way from the railroad going on.
When was the canal stopped being used?
1923, the record show, and it stopped operations down in Georgetown. They sold water and did other stuff. But the moving of boats, coal and all that happened in 23. 24, everybody, you see the date 24, but 24, they had a flood on May 30th of 24. In the paper, what was interesting, in the newspaper, like Hagerstown paper, they would always report when the canal would be rewatered, so the local captains would know. You could get ready. And they also would tell you when they quit. So you had your boat where you wanted it, you didn't get stuck somewhere. Well, they kept saying that the canal was gonna continue to operate, see, in the 20s. And somebody went down to Shepherdstown, they said, well, there was a farm down there where they kept the mules in the wintertime. And somebody said, well, the mules were gone, and told them they were gone. They're not gonna run the canal. And they were right, but the company kept telling the old people in the paper, oh yeah, we're gonna get her started again, you know, don't worry about it. But they never did, of course. Yeah.
What were some of the other products, non-coal products?
Well, lumber, grain, you saw it with in fact, the big, large timbers that were used to build the iron tannery in Williamsport were floated down from Hancock. Actually, they were lashed together because they were huge wooden timbers. And they made them the size of the canal boats that you do lost. And they actually floated them like a raft. And then when they got to the tannery site, which was just off the canal, they just pulled them off and built the buildings with. See, the first tannery was wall wood and it burned in 1897.
They floated them on the canal, not the river.
At the canal, yes.
They haul a lot of cement too.
Yes, they did. They hauled cement from like Roundtop Cement Company and so on. Well, they hauled everything at one time. I think a lot of lumber on there, and cross ties with the railroad, stuff like that. Oh, yeah. And I guess stone, I don't know, building stone and so on.
They haul sand up from, to build the power plant.
Did they?
Some of
Yeah.
that, all the sand to build the power plant.
Okay, yeah.
Not all,
What a special sand probably. Yeah, they could almost anything, and you see pig iron, remember? The pig iron, the crane upset, all pig iron in World War One, so even they did that.
So when the boats went down to Georgetown, they would not come back empty, they would be bringing.
Well, most of the time they came back empty. Once in a while, hopefully they had something to bring back, right? You always want to backhaul something. I work on trucking, and, that's a great thing, you want to get a backhaul. Railroad too, everybody wants a backhaul, you want loads, every time you move something, your equipment, you want it to be loaded, or else you're moving it for nothing, okay? Yeah, anything else? I didn't see any other.
It's one of those photographs, it's dating that. I can't remember.
What was it, you yelled at me. Yeah, you mean the one with the train in it?
Yeah.
That was real old?
Yeah.
I don't know, but I think 1870, what do you think, Dick? You've seen it. It's kind of been around a lot. As far as I know, it's about in the 1870s, probably after the railroad first got there. I'm guessing, because see, every Cushwa was on that building. And Cushwa bought it in 1880. Cushwa bought out Emory. So it was before 1880, okay. If they painted the building right away, it was. Yes,
How many mules did it usually take to pull the canal?
two.
Nope, just two.
Yeah, well, it didn't take much, Two resting, two pulling. And they changed them. Remember his film, they changed them when they got to a lock, so they didn't have to slow down or stop. You stopped at a lock, so that's when you change your mules. Try to keep moving, you got paid for the trip, so you want to keep moving day and night, 24 hours, you kept moving. That's why the kids were out there leading the mules and all that. You had the whole family along working, It was a family affair, I'll tell you. One fellow there's all kind of newspaper articles, a man, they used to shoot a lot of birds from the canal boats, like doves and so on, be in the fields, so these guys would, when the boats just drifted along, they'd take a shotgun out and shoot a couple birds and then go over the side and, run and grab them. Well, one guy was coming down to Williamsport, he was going to unload a Cushwa, and there were some doves up around the water plant area, and he went to reach in the window of the cabin to pull the shotgun out, and it went off and blew his head off. And he fell in the water, of course, and they had to bring the coroner up to declare him dead. But the shotgun caught something, the trigger did, and blew his head off. So that was once, it was in the paper, a big deal. This man was a well-known canal boat captain. He'd been on a long time. To be killed like that was terrible. It was just such a dumb accident. And I remember it said, this is also interesting. He had two hands on the boat. His family wasn't there. He was the captain, and he had a black man and a teenage girl as his crew. And they mentioned that in the article, and I thought that seemed like an odd combination. But that was his crew. So apparently, all different kinds of people would be a crew if you didn't have family, But I don't get into all that part of it. Karen Gray, who the canal people knew very well, she passed away. She was quite an expert on it. She liked the social and family aspect of the canal. She liked to give lectures on that a lot. Because she felt it was such a nice, sort of a cottage industry, which it was. And it had a lot of romance to it, because it was quiet. you can imagine drifting along on a summer night, you know, through the dark, and all you hear is birds and insects and all that. It was very, very peaceful. Anything else? Yes.
So would the mules all have been owned by the canal company then?
What's that?
Were the mules owned by the canal company?
Well, later on, no. At first they were owned by the captain. But when the railroad took it over, they owned everything, okay? And that's what they, you know, that's the way they treat it, just like it was another railroad. And, but most of the canals, like I showed you, the Pennsylvania Canal, most all the tidewater canals in the east, with the exception of the Erie Canal, quit about 1900. Isn't that right, Dave, about that? C&O was unusual. It lasted into the 20s. That's another reason it's kind of been preserved, you know. It's one of the few that didn't just completely get destroyed. Yes, sir.
The canal that hit the wall of the aqueduct and ended up in the creek.
Yes, sir.
Did they get it back or did they disassemble it?
I think it's all there yet, isn't it? The stones, you mean?
Excuse me?
You talking about the stones?
No, I'm talking about the canal.
Oh, the boat. They floated it down the river
Oh, down to McMahon's Mill where.
and put it back in
I got
the
you.
slack water.
Yeah, I never even gave that a thought. The dam wasn't there at that time.
That's right. The power dam was not there,
Right.
see. That wasn't there till 1923 or whatever.
Makes sense.
Yeah, they could float it the whole way down. They had to,
Right.
or else cut it up, you know. Yeah, because they said that in the article somewhere.
Yeah, I forgot the canal. The boats actually went out into the river.
Mhm.
The power
Yeah,
dam.
it's slack water. So.
Yeah.
Now, you know, up at dam number 5, you had a slack water there too, you know, about dam 5. When they built the powerhouse that's there now in 1917, that was the Tom Edison, not Tom, H&F Railway, okay. They built it was an old pulp mill that had been converted into a power plant. They tore it down and completely rebuilt it out of concrete, brick, and steel. And most of all the material was moved up on the canal from Williamsport. It was brought in by rail, transferred to canal barges, taken up, and they took the barges across the river in the slack water, unloaded them on the other side, and had a little railroad, took them down to the construction site because there was no railroad nearby on the other side, see? In 1917, all the heavy stuff had to be moved by rail.
That was just upstream from
I've
Nussel.
got a photograph showing that whole operation. That
How
was
far
fascinating.
upstream from Nussel's quarry was that?
Well, it was even
Not
beyond,
far.
you know, it was dam 5. So that's what, well, Nestle Quarry had the railroad in, but they weren't in, until, they were in, but they didn't bring it in that way. Because it didn't go close enough to the dam site, see. No, they brought it in with canal boat. Because the main generator, the replacement is still there for the main generator. The first one, though, had a cracked housing on the top. When they got to Williamsport, it was cracked in transit. And I've got this correspondence between the company that built it and the railroad, and they had to return it to Ohio where it was built. They replaced it, and then that's the one that's there today. The generator number 1. As far as I know, it's still turning slightly. All that stuff is in mothballs, but it's fascinating how they have to move things in. And they also have to raise the dam about a foot. You know, it was a canal dam, and they raised it to be the power dam. That's the one you see today when you go up. Any others?
Is
Yes.
Mr. Wilkes' book still available?
I have no idea. You have to get online and, ma'am?
Yeah, are there any records kept on who these canal captains were or anything like that?
Oh, yeah, there's lots of stuff,
Okay.
lots. The Unruh, in the Unruh collection,
If you go into the, C&O Canal Association's website, a lot of that stuff is on there.
Yeah.
William Walton keeps putting.
people keep putting it on, I guess. Because Unruh did all that, right? It was in that book that Karen put together. The Unruh collection of material.
Yeah, yeah.
And of course, this book I pointed out, the one, the Great National Project, that, he has a lot of information, but not all that detail. The detail is in that, the records that the government has in the archives, really, is where it is, right?
Western Maryland from here has a ton of canal.
Yeah, that's right. She might not know it, but she does. Yes,
My
Go ahead.
son's really into trains. Can you tell me more about this engine?
Oh, that engine, yes, that's Cumberland Valley number 41. And I can tell you where there's a better photo of it. Do you know and she has it in the room over there.
Okay.
If you talk to me afterwards, I'll direct you over, you can see that engine.
Okay, I mean, my son's really, yeah, look at the 44, 49, they like, look at 4014, big, what, you know what I mean? He knows.
Yeah, I
all
know,
of
well, that's number 41, it's a 10-wheeler. And that's for, putting in 6 driving wheels. We can talk to that later. Okay. You see me in a minute, I'll tell you.
Okay.
Okay. Anything else? Yes, sir.
When I was growing up in Williamsport, as a kid, we were told that initially the, the bridge over the Potomac was a walking bridge,
Yes.
and you were charged by who was walking. And so people would put another person on their shoulders and only get charged for the one below. Is that true?
I have no idea. That's great. I love the story. I know that kind of wooden deck as you see all the time, even when the cars come over. Anybody else? I want to thank you for your attention. I hope you got something out of it, enjoyed it, and have a good evening.